Hello everyone, my name is Olivia, and today I'm going to be recommending a couple of books and movies that I think Hannibal Lecter would enjoy. So basically, if you love the Hannibal show, then you are going to love all of these books and all of these movies, and this is kind of a hodgepodge type of video. I'm also going to pivot into a reading vlog where I try out one of the books that has been on my TBR that I think Hannibal Lecter would enjoy. If you do not know, Hannibal is one of my favorite shows of all time. I think it's one of the most cinematic and remarkable shows out there today, and it is only 3 seasons. It is completely wrapped up, so I highly recommend it. But if you do not know what the premise is, it follows a man named Will Graham. He is a consultant to the FBI, and he is helping the FBI in an attempt to catch a serial killer that is running rampant. Will Graham has a very mysterious skill where he is able to replicate the crime scenes that he watches, so he gets to put himself into the mind of the killer, and you can tell that that puts him through a lot of trauma. So in order to try and get over his trauma and really kind of heal, he goes to a psychologist named Hannibal Lecter. They form a very close relationship, and it is a beautiful, horrifying show to watch. It is beautiful in the way that it is shot and the way that these characters speak, because they speak very poetically, but it's also incredibly horrifying because you get to witness all these different crimes that the FBI is trying to solve, and then you get to witness the slow descent and character corruption of Will Graham because of his relationship with Hannibal Lecter. So not only does this show deal with character corruption arcs, but it also deals a lot with food and the beauty of it and the preparation that goes into it, but it's also kind of turned on its head because Hannibal Lecter is a cannibal. So this is a very interesting type of mix of books that I have to recommend to you, along with a book that I'm going to try out myself. But these are books that I think that Hannibal Lecter would enjoy because they're poetic, they deal a lot with food and the beauty of it, but it also deals with characters who are inherently morally gray, and they don't have the best intentions, or they start out from a good place and eventually corrupt themselves or are corrupted by others, and they get to a point in life where they are unrecognizable from themselves at the beginning of the novel or the beginning of the movie. So let's start with some book recommendations. We have to start with the classic, the book that the show is based off of, and it is The Red Dragon by Thomas Harris. The Red Dragon is the basis for the Hannibal show, but is largely the inspiration for season 3 of Hannibal. This follows Will Graham as he is trying to figure out who the Red Dragon is, who is a prominent serial killer that is just eluding the FBI, but it also deals with Hannibal Lecter's influence over the FBI. Hannibal Lecter was a criminal that really took the FBI by surprise, so you not only see Will Graham as he is working in the FBI and he is trying to capture the Red Dragon, but we also follow the hints here and there of Hannibal as well as the perspective of the Red Dragon himself. This is a book that's very different from Hannibal, but I did really enjoy my time while reading this book. I thought it was so engaging. It was a book that really took me by surprise. I did not expect to like it as much as I did, and while it is very different from the show, I thought it was really nice to kind of see the source material for the show and see how that show was influenced by it, because there's a lot of dialogue between Hannibal and Will Graham that is also included in the show, word for word, so seeing that in the book and comparing it to the show was a really interesting thing to do. I'm not going to be continuing on with this series because the third book deals with Mason Verger, who is one of my least favorite villains of all time in the Hannibal show, so reading from his perspective and just dealing with him all over again is not ideal to me, so I really enjoyed the first 2 books in the Hannibal Lecter series. So if you do want to give it a shot, I think this is the perfect place to start for Hannibal books. If you are looking for a dark academia book that reminds you of the relationship between Hannibal and Will Graham, I highly recommend These Violent Delights. These Violent Delights is set in the 80s during university. We follow a boy named Paul who has recently lost his father, and he feels very isolated from this world when he befriends a boy named Julian in his university, and they form a very obsessive, toxic relationship with one another. This is a book that I could see Hannibal really enjoying because it is so poetic. The writing style is just gorgeous and full of purple prose, and it's so pompous in the way that Paul and Julian speak to each other. They speak to each other in a way that they think they're just so much better than everyone else. They think they are more intellectual and just superior to others, and that reminds me a lot of the way that Hannibal views himself to to others besides Will Graham. He sees himself as superior and he sees Will Graham as an equal. This is a beautiful book, a wonderful dark academia that reminded me a lot of the dynamic between Will Graham and Hannibal Lecter. So if you're looking for that type of relationship, especially a character corruption arc where a person starts out seemingly good and then you see them descend and just become a nightmare version of themselves, this is the book for you. A book that I recently read that I greatly enjoyed that I think Hannibal Lecter would enjoy because it deals a lot with food and just the overall influence it could have on one's life is Cursed Bread. Cursed Bread is a very short novel that will just leave a big impact on you. It is a book that is inspired by an actual event that took place during the 1950s in a French village where the town was mass poisoned and they blamed the bread. So in this novel, we follow our main character, Elodie, who is the baker's wife, and a new woman has recently moved into town and her name is Violet. She is the wife of an ambassador and she has a very enigmatic type of presence to her. She is somewhat superior to the women in town because she dresses nicer, she doesn't have a laborious job, and she is just a very pretty woman who stands out from the crowd. So Elodie begins to befriend Violet and she somewhat becomes obsessed with her. And through that relationship where they are equally enamored by each other, this relationship forms that is all-consuming, somewhat similar to These Violent Delights in the way that these two characters cannot get enough of each other, but are they in love with each other or are they incredibly envious of one another? You can never really tell because their dynamic is so toxic and all-consuming. Cursed Bread is also an incredibly poetic, beautifully written novel that just took my breath away. It is a book that I cannot stop thinking about, and I also was obsessed with how erotic and how beautiful the relationship was between Elodie and Violet. It was feverish and obsessive and just so beautifully written to see a relationship that is so incredibly toxic and you can see it so clearly from the outside, but these two characters cannot see it as the relationship develops. It is a beautiful, stunning, haunting novel that I think Hannibal Lecter or fans of Hannibal in general would greatly enjoy because it deals with food, it deals with this very dangerous type of relationship, and it was just explosive. Next, I have 4 movies that I would have to recommend if you love the show Hannibal. One I actually haven't seen, but I do want to see in the future, but I do know it would fall under this category of movies that I think Hannibal Lecter would enjoy. So the first movie is Fresh. Fresh is a movie on Hulu that starts out somewhat as a romantic comedy between a woman who is tired of dating apps, and one day she is in the grocery store when she naturally meets a man, and she begins to date him, and things take a turn for the worst. This is a movie that you have to go in without knowing too much about it and just enjoy the ride. It is ridiculous, it is funny, it is dark, and it's just a very haunting type of movie that is very lighthearted. So it's different from Hannibal tonally because Hannibal is a show that's consistently dark and subdued, but this is a very brightened version of what I think a movie Hannibal Lecter would enjoy. Fresh is a movie that I can rewatch over and over again. It is just a twisted time and I highly recommend it. I think it's fun. Another movie that I know Hannibal Lecter would enjoy is The Menu. The Menu is also a horror comedy that is a little bit more subdued in the way that it expresses itself because it's not as colorful and vibrant as Fresh. The Menu is a dark comedy that follows a group of incredibly rich people who go to an island to have dinner at a famous chef's restaurant. So we follow our main character, Margot, who is played by Anya Taylor-Joy, and she is an absolute delight of a character because she is an outsider to all of this. Everyone in this restaurant is incredibly rich and paid a lot to attend this event, but Anya Taylor-Joy's character is invited as a date and she is somewhat of an outsider to this whole entire situation. It is satirical in the way that it showcases the different types of rich people and how incredibly terrible they are in restaurants. And then we also follow the chef who is preparing this event, and he is a very serious type of person that is so consumed by the art of food itself. And that reminds me a lot of Hannibal, who takes a lot of pride in the food that he creates and the different dishes that he comes up for friends, and I think the way that they showcase how pompous culinary arts can be in this movie is very similar to the way that Hannibal cooks for the friends that he has in the show, because his dishes are never normal. They're never just steak and fries. He always has something so fancy that you cannot even pronounce, and that reminds me a lot of the menu in the way that it makes fun of people like Hannibal. I do think it's a lot of fun and definitely worth your time, and definitely big Hannibal vibes. Another movie that I saw for my movie club, which is the Cinebun Club, which is hosted over on my Discord. We watch a movie every single month together, and it is live streamed over on my Discord. It's really fun if you want to join and you want to get into a very low effort club that happens every single month. It is located over on my Discord, and everyone is free to join around the world. We watched Phantom Thread. Phantom Thread is a movie that wasn't on my radar for years upon years until people started talking about it on Twitter, and people recommended it to me because they thought it was up my alley and very much my vibe. Phantom Thread follows a very famous dressmaker named Reynolds Woodcock who becomes enamored by this woman that he meets, and her name is Alma, and they have a pretty significant age difference, but they begin to work together and form this very close bond in the way that they create dresses together, but they also form a toxic, all-consuming relationship in the way where they think, if I can't have you, nobody can. Which is very much Will Graham and Hannibal Lecter in the show Hannibal. The way that they are just obsessed with one another, they hate one another, but they can't get enough of one another. And that is what Phantom Thread is all about. I think it's really underrated because I think the way that they marketed it and the way that they showcased it in trailers just made it seem like a boring historical fiction movie, but it's so much more than that. It's so dynamic, it's so fresh and new in the way that it can examine a relationship, especially one with an age gap, and it was just so good. So good. And the last movie that I have to recommend, I have not seen because it's not on streaming, and I am not paying for MGM Plus to go see it, and it is Bones and All. Bones and All is from the director of Call Me By Your Name, and it also stars Timothée Chalamet as well. I don't know much about Bones and All because I haven't really read anyone's reviews, but I think the storyline follows two people who have this uncontrollable need to eat people, and they are kind of loners in society and come together and form this bond. That's what I really understood from Bones and All. Let me know if I'm wrong about it, but let me know what you think about it as well, because this seems incredibly up Hannibal's alley, especially with the whole cannibalism portion of the movie. But I also think it's very interesting that it follows two loners because Hannibal Lecter and Will Graham are both very much loners in society. Hannibal is very good at making friends. He's very good at presenting himself in society, but he never actually connects with anyone. He never actually feels a kinship or a friendship with others. And Will Graham is a straight up loner. He doesn't have any friends. He's very traumatized by the things that he has gone through. And that reminds me a lot of Bones and All, where these two characters are very much isolated from society and they come together to form this relationship that I don't think might be healthy. That's a movie that I have not seen yet, but I do really want to see because I do think it's right up my alley. I think these books and these movies definitely have different elements of the show Hannibal in their stories, in the way that they explore relationships, in the way that they highlight food, in the way that they highlight a character who has no morals. So let me know if you have any recommendations for stories and books that are in this type of vein, that deal with these types of elements. But I'm also so excited to bring you over to the reading vlog portion of this video because I picked up a book that I thought would be the perfect read for Hannibal Lecter. Let me know if there are other characters that you would want me to do book recommendations and movie recommendations for, because I will love to do this in the future. I loved this type of video. I loved how I started out with recommendations, now I'm bringing you into a little reading vlog. I just love it overall, but let's go over into the reading vlog. went to a cafe to work for a couple of hours, and afterwards I was able to read a couple of pages of A Certain Hunger before I went home. And A Certain Hunger I am 60 pages into out of like 250, so it's a pretty quick read, and I do think I can finish it in a couple of sittings. But I wrote down some thoughts about it that I wanted to share so I don't forget anything. But I am really enjoying Certain Hunger. I feel like this is a very polarizing book. People either love it or hate it, or are really kind of muddled in between all of that, and they don't really necessarily feel connected to it. And while I don't feel necessarily connected to the main character because she is just a terrible person, I do think that Hannibal Lecter would adore this novel. So A Certain Hunger follows our main character Dorothy, who writes a lot about culinary arts, which does hit the personality trait that Hannibal Lecter has, where he loves to cook and he's a very big foodie. And what makes Dorothy a bit different from everyone else is that she lives a life that other people don't necessarily know about until it's too late. So it says, recounting her life from a seemingly idyllic farm-to-table childhood, the heights of her career, to the moment she plunges an ice pick into a man's neck, Dorothy Daniels shows us what happens when a woman finally embraces her superiority. One thing that I do really enjoy is the fact that she talks directly to the reader. It feels very much like Gone Girl in that sense, where Amy Dunn is speaking directly to the audience, and it feels somewhat like you're exposed because the main character knows that you're reading her story and she knows that she's exposing these deep and dark parts of herself, so it feels a bit unsettling to have her speak directly to you, which I really do enjoy. And one thing that I think is interesting about Dorothy is how much internalized misogyny she has within her soul. She feels like she's better than other women because she isn't as feminine. She's not talking like other women who use like and those filler words when they speak, and she feels like she is above them because she doesn't like the mainstream things that most women like, which is an internalized misogyny because she feels like she's better than other women because she does not act traditionally like women in society. So I think if you love the movie The Menu, if you love Hannibal the show, or even the books, if you like Villanelle from Killing Eve or Amy Dunn from Gone Girl, you would love this novel. I'm having a really good time with it. I'm excited to see it unfold and really understand Dorothy's motivations and why she is the way she is. But I do think it's a really interesting conversation about her motivations and why she's doing what she's doing. Does she feel superior to men? Does she feel superior to women and having to prove a point? Or is it a mixture of the both? I do think it's a mixture of the both. And I'm excited to read on. I just know that Hannibal would be like, oh, this is refreshing. She thinks like me, she acts like me, she is on my level, she is an equal. So I finally finished A Certain Hunger, and I feel weird saying that I enjoyed it, but I did. This is like my first foray into horror, so it feels weird rating something based on how vile it is and how it made me somewhat reluctant to pick up because the main character and living inside of her head was so deeply unpleasant, but it was so well written and so fascinating to be in the mind of someone who is so evil that I couldn't help but have a good time. Yes, I didn't necessarily feel excited to pick up this book because it was so nauseating and so artfully vile, but I was able to appreciate the prose and the message that the author was trying to send. I do think that Hannibal would enjoy this novel because not only is the main character a food critic, but I also think he would enjoy it because it's a person who you wouldn't expect to be a serial killer, but she is. And he would deeply appreciate her tenacity and her craft, and I do think that he would enjoy the fact that she also eats the rude because these are men that she doesn't necessarily respect, and due to that lack of respect she doesn't value their life, which I do find very fascinating to examine throughout this whole entire novel. But it was just a fun experience. It was a new territory for literature that I didn't really dip my toes into, and I'm really glad that I did for this challenge because it just kind of broadened my horizon. I completely forgot to finish this video. I never said goodbye, but I do hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the recommendation portion of the video as well as my reading vlog. Let me know if there are any other characters that you would love me to recommend books and movies for, or to try out some books and movies that remind me of those characters. I would love to get your recommendations down below. If you want to follow me anywhere else on social media, my links will also be in the description. If you've stayed this far in the video, leave a meat emoji down below in honor of Hannibal. And that's all I'll say about that. I'll see you around. Bye!